everyone. I'm Rex. I am one half of Sword, which is a little game-making collaboration between myself and my friend Moo Yu. And we are making a game called Knights and Bikes, which hopefully you've heard of, but you might not have, which is an action-adventure about two girls cycling around an English island in the 1980s. Trying to find a legendary lost treasure. And we originally kickstarted the game a few years ago. So we owe all of this to our backers, some of which are actually playing the game at the moment because we've given it to them a couple of days early, and they seem to be enjoying it. Which is good. It's quite a tense time at the moment because, well, you know, it's just nerve-wracking. You know, finding out after several years of building a game, you know, has it all been in vain? You hope not. You put your all into it. Try and do a really good job. I am quite a perfectionist, so I'm always going to be like the harshest critic of my own work. So it is good to hear if someone else has enjoyed it. But yeah, very nerve-wracking because the game only comes out in a few hours. So I wanted to talk a bit today about sketchbooks because they are like the centre of my whole process, really. And designing the game, or putting together short films or art projects, all things that I've enjoyed doing in the past. My particular role on Knights and Bikes is doing the art, animation, level design, and the writing. So I find the sketchbooks really useful as a way to get lots of ideas out. I also, on the team, I guess I'm mostly in charge of things like outside of the game for Knights and Bikes. So the way the brand is dealt with and how it also can expand out to other areas. So we've already got 2 Knights and Bikes books written by Gabrielle Kent, which have come out, which are really fun, really good to read. I did the covers of these, and then a guy called Luke Newell, who did the internal illustrations, and you know, really fun. And those were fun projects to do as well alongside the game. But today I'm mostly going to be focusing on the game and the sketchbooks that I've worked through whilst building it. So I've got quite a few of them. This isn't all of them, but there's a good chunk there. And you know, I try and get a lot of ideas down in these first before working onto the computer. In terms of just, you know, what I like using, for this project I've got really into using these books from an art bookshop called Magma here in London. And I really like these ones because they are a little bit like the Moleskine, don't know if you fancy it, but, you know, those famous ones. But I like these because they're a little bit more flexible. You know, they're softer paper. You feel like you can you can't quite stuff them in your back pocket, but you know, you can carry them around with you a bit more easily. What else can I say about? They have this little closing mechanism. Well, mechanism's a bit fancy. It's a bit of elastic, but I don't know. Something kind of nice when you finish your work for the day. Just like put that round, you know. It's like shutting the laptop. You know, work's done. Don't open it again. Although, you know, chances are you probably do a bit later. My cats love them as well because they can, like, pretend they're in like aristocrats or aristocats. They're always twanging away on sketchbooks until this happens. Anyway, so they love them as well. So very popular in the family. Yeah, so I like how soft they are, how easy they are to carry around, and then in terms of like what I like to draw with, I actually like one of these. See that artifact? That is like the cheapest biro you can possibly buy. I kind of alternate between blue and black. I think probably black works better. And I really like these because they are super cheap. And they're great art tools anyway. They're not necessarily what you might be encouraged to use in art school, but I find that you can get a really nice variety of line work. So you can, press down quite hard, you get a really hard outline, and I'm not like a sketchy artist. I like to just, I'm making a shape. Let's just go for it. Let's just have fun. Let's see what happens. So I like to be very bold with like outlines and just general, linear work. But then also, what's really nice about them is you can, by not pressing so hard, you can use them more like a pencil. You can get some quite sort of soft tones, which just enable you to create quite a range. The hard and soft together. They're obviously, very cheap, so it doesn't really matter if you step on it or break it. And I think I've always, since a kid, been looking for, or trying to prove to myself that I can make like decent work with cheap tools rather than relying on something fancy. I think probably the reason for that is because as a kid, I used to like reading comics, and I would, look at the artwork, and it was so perfect and so detailed, and I became convinced that I needed this super fine pen, a rotoring pen, which was very expensive, at least for me as a kid with no income or anything. So I found this super fine tipped pen and saved up for it, and birthdays and Christmas and what have you, in order to get this pen that was so fine. And the first time I used it, I took it out, and you had to screw in like ink cartridges, and you had all sorts of like little tools that came with it for all the maintenance, so that you made sure that the ink could still flow through the pen, because the tip of the pen was like the size of an atom. It was so fine. I was like, this is going to be amazing. And I went to draw, and I pressed down on the page, and I snapped the entire end of the nib off. And that was ruined. So, and what I didn't realise, which no one tells kids, or probably anyone, is that comic books are actually drawn much larger, and then they get scaled down, and all those imperfections and things, they all disappear, and they just become, they just look so perfect. So I was just trying to chase this impossible goal anyway, because comics were not drawn at actual size. So let's check out Sketchbook. This one, a little sticker on it. This is from when myself and Moo went to visit Leica with our Double Fine friends. It was very exciting trip. I love their movies. Anyway, let's have a little look inside. So here's a standard page. I have to be quite careful about which pages I show you, because everything gets planned down here. So lots of spoilers. But I'm going to try and just show you some interesting stuff that doesn't ruin the game for you. And this isn't a particularly exciting page, but I think it's just a good place to start. There's some not very good artwork. Things are just drawn out as they come to mind. It doesn't always mean that they're best drawing, but it's about getting the ideas down and sort of documenting it, so that you've got it all there, so that when you get onto the computer, you can work it up more. Sometimes I am trying to work out like how a character might look, or what have you. So there'll be more like iterations, but most of the time it's just, get the ideas down. And this is a page from, I can see at the top, because I like to write down, what's going on, how I'm feeling, all of these things. I treat it like a diary. I can see that we've just sent, at this point, we've just sent our alpha build off to our publishers at Double Fine. So that was a good moment. And because of that, there was just a little bit more time to try and work up, some sections of the game. Like work out which are the problem areas and which areas you can do something about before you ship it. And I was particularly here looking at some things that I wanted to add to the harbour section of the game. So the game all takes place on this island called Penfurzy, which is based on Cornwall in the UK, where I grew up. So lots of like personal recollections of what it was like to grow up there and the kind of things that you saw, all combined with like Moo's recollections of like playing multiplayer games as a kid with other kids. So something I like to do is, I think I've already said this, is like write down, really write down like what things are you trying to achieve, what are you trying to solve, and quite often it seems like it's a bit over the top, adding all of these extra little frames and writing things out in funny fonts and adding lots of detail. But I find that it just means that you're spending a little bit more time thinking about what you're trying to. It's putting yourself in like the right sort of headspace, and I think it's good to have those moments where you're working at your craft whilst also thinking about what you're trying to achieve. I have this issue with working digitally in Photoshop. That if you're painting on a canvas, you have lots of quite tedious jobs to do. They're not really tedious, but they're not that fun to watch. At least, say you might be painting the entire background in, and it all needs to be blue. So blue, putting all the blue in. Except that you're not thinking about blue while you're doing it. Maybe you are a little bit, but you're also thinking about, well, what's coming next? How's that going to work with the next colour you're going to add in? Or there's a whole bunch of thought processes going through your head while you're doing the tedious thing. And I think that when you move on to the computer and you do digital stuff and you have something like a flood fill, yes, it takes away the need to fill it all in, but it also robs you of that moment of like really processing and thinking what comes next. So I never use the flood fill in Photoshop. I always paint it all in, which is sort of adds to the look of the game of the final game, because it has been very hand painted in. There's no flood fill stuff going on. And it's the same principle here, where really put time into just doing all the lettering and kind of making it fairly neat in my own wonky way, so that I'm thinking about the ideas whilst putting that down, jotting it all down. So I was kind of thinking here on this page, these pages, about the harbour, which is one of my favourite areas of the game. I think because the game is set, where I grew up. This particular zone of the game probably most directly represented some of the areas I grew up around, like little fishing villages like Port Isaac and Padstow and Foy, and all like beautiful places that you should go and visit in Cornwall. But with this kind of little bit of potential extra time at the end of the game, it felt like maybe there was an opportunity to add a little bit more into that environment, because this particular section isn't like it's not a level with like a linear level where you have combat and you have big puzzles, and you'll kind of push through it in a certain way for the pacing and for the sort of excitement of the story. This is a more well, just somewhere to like hang out. It felt that going to the harbour town as a pair of kids, established that the game is this game about two girls, Nessa and Demelza, on their treasure hunting quest. And going to this town would be somewhere that they essentially like killing time for the day. So they can spend as long or as little time potentially there as they like. And some players are going to enjoy like digging around and trying to find everything and speaking to everyone. And other players are probably going to skip through it more quickly because that's not maybe their sort of style of gameplay or interaction with the game world. So these pages were just like trying to figure out what other things we could add, so some of what I think is really fun about designing games is coming up with like certain systems and then repurposing them again multiple times so that you've got shared work, but it means that you give them little twists that make them more interesting. So there's a bit of that, of like thinking, well, we've already got these methods that you can have like competitive challenges in the game, because the game's for single player, but it's also co-op, both locally and online, which Miri's been working very hard on. So we had various ways that players could like challenge each other. Most of the game you're helping each other, but it's nice to have little moments of challenge. So like, figuring out, is there a way to get like a little challenge into the harbour section? And then this idea popped up of, kids, that classic game of ringing doorbells and running away. It was kind of fascinating. I had no idea, but as soon as I started to research it, it turned out that just everywhere in the world, well, everywhere in the UK at least, and it would be interesting to know if anyone else has other names for it, but all over the UK it has completely different names, and we just went down a complete rabbit hole of finding out all of these names. Some of them are really odd as well. I think one of my favourites was Knockdown Ginger. I have no idea the origins of that, but apparently ringing a doorbell and running away can be called Knockdown Ginger. So that was a little idea, and that was just almost like drawing a little vignette that might pop up as you ring the doorbell, and from that, it didn't need a lot of work in Sketchbook, but I could go into Photoshop, paint up the animation and do that work, and then take it into Unity, make a prototype version that was like enough to demonstrate the idea and get like a feeling for it, and then with that prototype Unity version, show it to Moo, and he was able to just make sure that it wouldn't like break. It had like some underpinnings that would make sure that it wouldn't like, mess up for anyone. And also because of the online aspect, you have to do lots of work to make sure that all of that information is getting sent back and forth over the network. So we need to do some extra work to make sure that when one player rings a doorbell, the other player on the other side of the world also sees that doorbell being rung. So there's a little process there. Here is so this page, there's the harbour. I just sketched it out as a map, so I could remember all of the different areas of the level that you can explore, and thinking about where these new elements would be placed. Our collection challenge would work nicely here, and various other things. And then also, like, an important thing I wanted to do was make sure that some of the key story beats of the game were also being represented. So the one aspect of the game is the knights of the Knights and Bikes title. So there's some lore on the island about there being a party of ancient knights who came to the island and buried their treasure. This treasure is now cursed, and this is the treasure that our game characters are trying to find and dig up and find its untold riches. You know, I didn't feel necessarily that, you know, that it's like you got to the harbour and it was a cool place and it had all of this stuff, but I did make sure that you just had little reminders of the knights and the treasure. So, you know, a little bit of thinking about how to bring that out in the environment. And then also, you know, we've got a whole list here, but thinking about another key area is Demelza and her family. And just before sometime before the start of the game, Demelza's mother has died. And that's, you know, a key theme in the game. She's like processing and trying to get over this grief. So it's like, well, is there a way to just remind the player of that? You know, up until this point, the characters have been they're kind of newfound friends, so they're having all kinds of adventures together and all jumping on bikes and cycling around in the woods and what have you, all with the aim of finding this treasure. It feels that there should be some times where you just, you know, you do remember these original, or these key elements of what makes up the characters and why they're doing what they do. So, you know, I wanted to get in some reference to Demelza's mum and the church. Here we go, the church up here felt like, you know, a good spot. It had a graveyard, but it was like a generic graveyard. So added in Demelza's mum's grave in there, so you can have a little moment. You know, the game is like cute and funny and over the top, but also want to make sure that there are some, you know, there's some emotional depth to it as well. So it's a little moment with Nessa and Demelza at her mum's grave. Demelza's been drawing on the grave with crayons, which the vicar thinks is very inappropriate, but that's her way of communicating with her mum. And then also, what else have we got? So the main sort of story beats I was trying to hit was Knights and Treasure, you know, the legend, the video gamey bit, and then Demelza and her family, you know, thinking about what she's dealing with and how Nessa is helping her with that. And then the last bit was being a kid. You know, the game tries to really get back to that kind of playful, imaginative play aspect of being a kid, you know, making up games, creating challenges for each other, you know, and just looking at the world in quite a different way. And we have quite a lot of fun with that in the way that the stuff like gets drawn onto the game as the kids are imagining stuff. So we mess around with, you know, with reality, you know, what is real and what isn't in this world. And then also figuring out, like, or maybe to add an arcade section, because it's very it's a very like natural, slightly oldie worldy kind of rundown kind of place. Lots of fishing cottages, all made out of cob, like some sort of building material made up of kind of like old junk. And then with lots of slate hanging on it protect it from the elements. So yeah, you've got all these little tumble down cottages, all like clinging onto the cliffside. But because it is set in the 1980s, it felt that it would be fun to just have a little bit of that sort of like end of the pier, seaside feel, a little bit of sort of neon and, you know, kind of slightly like obnoxious noises and, you know, but stuff that really makes you think of the seaside as well. So added in a little arcade section here. And then this page, next page, this is more of a overall design page. And this was thinking about how all through the game you have both characters have various abilities that they unlock. And we designed those abilities to be like asymmetrical. So by the end of the game, Nessa has one set of abilities and Demelza has another. There's no overlap, but they are designed to interact nicely with each other, so that it encourages cooperation when we're playing co-op style. Yeah, so this was going back to the harbour and thinking, well, are there any extra things, little things that we could add in that would use some of those abilities? You know, it is a relatively linear story-based game, yeah, so you are being sort of, you know, driven through the story. You know, you are driving the story, I should say. But, you know, it's kind of nice if there's a few things to find around the edges and maybe some reasons to come back to some areas that we have already been to. So, yeah, just thinking of some ways that you could use those and various things that you could use them on. Not everything, you know, as always, not everything from Sketchbook makes it into the game. But it's fun to just get it all down, you know. It's not expensive to fill up a sketchbook with the world's cheapest pen. So, you know, it feels worth just getting everything down, and then you can decide, and not everything will make it in, but, you know, at least you got as much output as you could, so that you've got better stuff to pick from. Something here that never made it in, but I would have, not very good drawing, but I would have loved to have got this in. It's little dandelion clocks. You know, hit them and blow all the, I don't know what we call the individual bits of a dandelion clock, but those little flying bits that fly away. What else? Now we're into more completely different stuff here, a bit too spoilery. So I'm going to move on to another book. Another book. Right, so anytime that I'm not dealing with like design problems, you know, it's sort of, well, the kind of like writing things down, the more like journal side of the, you know, using a sketchbook. Anytime that I'm not really doing that, I tend to like fill up pages with character designs. I love, you know, that's my main love. I love creating characters. My process is always like create characters, create scenes, create world, create story, you know, sort of build out from the character. Like, what is an interesting character? What would be interesting scene to put them in? What's the wider context of that? And then, you know, create a story out of that. Anyway, so not all of the sketchbooks are just, you know, design notes and, you know, gameplay things. You know, quite a lot of it is still just drawing and having fun. Here's a page that, you know, probably represents that. A whole bunch of different characters. There's a wonky Demelza down here, and then some of the villagers, the islanders. You could meet on your adventure. I think probably only this one made it in, really. I really like this sort of like set of fun old ladies. She made it in. I really liked her sort of knitted hat. And kind of imagine what her hair is doing inside there, and how the hair would, you know, what would happen to it if she took the hat off. She's got some friends. I really like this character at the back. Unfortunately, for our age rating, we couldn't really have smokers in because we're for 7 and up. So yeah, she wouldn't have made the cut. She'd have to stub out her cigarette holder. It's a fun character. And a very wonky bike. Got very into drawing bikes in the way that probably kids would. And what else have we got? A few more characters. None of those actually made it into the game. Some more. Here's some more. Thinking more of like sort of teenage characters. There's one here, like an older girl that Demelza looks up to. Someone cool in the village. She didn't actually make it in that form, but there is a character that Nessa really looks up to, who's in the game. This is actually a really early version of her, more sort of like punky character. Even though the game's set in 1987, we've been able to be quite flexible with the type of things we put in because it's a very cut-off rural island. Certain certain trends have not really made it to the island. It's a little bit behind the times. So we've been able to take a whole bunch of things. Certain elements are slightly more sort of like late 70s, and other things are like more like late 80s, depending on how much those particular things are like connected to the outside world. So like Nessa, she comes from the outside world and comes to the island, so she's a little bit more clued up on what's going on, whereas Demelza is a little bit more sort of behind because she's sort of been in the closed off bubble of the island. And then, yeah, so these characters. What else can I show you? This might be interesting. So bikes, obviously a very large part of the game. Bikes were really sort of added in, right from the start, because we both felt that they were a really good way of representing and just a little bit of like coming of age, or like an early coming of age for kids, because until you have a bike, you're very reliant on your parents. You need them to take you places, give you lifts and what have you. And when you get your first bike, then you've got a little bit of independence. You can jump on that bike and you can go cycling off into the woods and start finding your own adventures and making your own friends, and everything really comes from that extra independence of having a bike. So really big core part of the game. And this is some exterior sketches of the bike shop in the game. And it's kind of like a barn. It's off in some woods. And I was trying to get a little bit of the feeling of contraptions, like wheels and pulleys and chains, and for audio as well. Try and think of like what would make interesting sounds, because Kenny, our audio designer, creator, he's just incredible sound guy. But I want to try and make sure that I give him opportunities to do the best work. So I'm trying to add things that will make sound. I mean, probably drive him nuts as well. Maybe I add too many things to make sound, but keeps him very busy. But we collaborate well on. I'll make something and he'll add sounds to it. And sometimes the sounds inspire me to then take things a little bit further, and that's a really fun process as well. Here's some internal stuff from the bike shop. This was a really early sketch. It's sort of got this L-shaped interior. I didn't really want to use that style though. Felt a bit too much like a SNES game. very sort of like boxy, classic shop style, and felt that probably we could use like have things in the foreground to cut up the shape and make it more interesting to explore. And because of the way our world is built with like layers of 2D stuff in a 3D world, the more things you have in the foreground, the more interesting it makes it to explore, because as you move things closer to the camera, they'll move differently, so things will be revealed as you take your footsteps forward. Some various items that you might see in the shop, very early preliminary drawing of a bike shop owner. More things happening in the bike shop. There's some little interlude with some gnomes. The gnomes aren't part of the bike shop, but they did get used somewhere else, which we'll come on to. More islanders, like this couple down here. Like how sort of saggy this guy is, and then I think this is probably his partner. She's weathered much better, probably because her expression is so much happier. She's not smiling has kept her younger. And some more. There's some bike shop sketches for the bike shop owner. This is Oba, who owns the bike shop, and he was a champion cyclist, but he has sort of semi-retired now. He's done with travelling all around the world, and he's come to Penfers and set up this bike shop. So he's almost like a little bit of a sort of like Merlin character, in that he gives you upgrades for your bike, which enable you to explore more of the island and get closer to finding the treasure. So he's a very useful character in the game. Some more sketches of him and various things. This guy here, I think I was watching Let the Right One In, possibly. I think that was the movie. And drew someone from it. He's quite different from everyone else on here. He wasn't like a serious contender, but it just put me in the right sort of like mood, really, for drawing. Some more characters. It's quite strange. But this one down here I quite like. And then this guy, he did turn up in the game as an artist who kind of artist sculptor person who although he's a great artist, he actually spends a lot of his time giving like watercolor lessons to tourists. Right, some proto versions. These were some crazy versions of Demelza. Demelza is really fun to draw and animate because she's so expressive. She really, all of her emotions just burst out of her face. And I wanted to make sure that there was a juxtaposition between Nessa and Demelza. Demelza is just all expression, and Nessa, being a little bit older and from the mainland, had a few more sort of like knocks. She's a bit more closed off in comparison. And then here's a character who's quite big in the game, called Elizabeth Morgan Porth. So everyone in the game, their surname is a Cornish base name, and then their first name is, their first name. And she's based a little bit on Daphne du Maurier, the writer who wrote Rebecca, and actually wrote quite a lot of sort of like horror or like creepy stories. I think she wrote The Birds, and she was still alive when I was a kid, and there was a book festival dedicated to her in Foy, near where she lived. And so similarly, this character, she's a writer, but she also owns the mobile library, which drives around the island, lending out books, because it's a cut-off island. There's no Amazon back in 1987, so it's quite hard for people to get hold of new books or any kind of book. So the mobile library drives around and lends them out to everyone on the island. Some more pictures of her. They all got quite changed by the time she made it into the game. But yeah, fun to plan her out to a certain degree in here. More characters. I don't think any of those don't even look like they'd be on Queen Thursday Island. Okay, so I was talking earlier about the church. Here's some of the quick sketches to plan it out. And a lot of this is not just, these are very wonky doodles really. But the key thing here is really not just working out an overall look for it, but also how to construct it. So our style in the method of construction we use is I basically create little paintings of smaller areas, like this front part of the church, and maybe this side-on part, and then maybe the tower is a separate piece. And the reason for doing that is that then I layer them up in Unity with some Z depth, so that you get nice parallax. So as you run around the church, it doesn't feel like it's just on one plane and it's just a cardboard cutout. By having some Z depth, you'll see that the tower moves slightly more slowly compared to what's in the foreground, so it feels much more believable. So what's sometimes useful is actually these are very simple sketches, but they give me a starting point to think, oh, I need a piece that will go here, I need a tower that goes behind, and start building out that asset. And then there's a little bit closer to the final look, the graveyard, and I was talking earlier about how later on, near the end of the game, added in Demelza's mother's grave as well to give it a bit more of a, make it part of the story. But this page is also the start of a level, which is a theme park level. And we really thought it would be fun to put a theme park in. I think that initially came from Moo, who he grew up right next to Disneyland in California, so he knows about theme parks. Our theme park does not have quite the same unlimited budget as Disneyland. It's a bit more sort of quaint and rundown. It's almost a little bit of a joke in that this is an island full of all kinds of legends. You've got the knights, you've got the lost treasure, that people come to the island to try and find the treasure. And you would kind of imagine that a theme park on the island would really maximise on that. But actually the theme park is designed to be almost completely the opposite of the island's big story. And it's all kind of a sort of Dingley Dell, you know what I mean by that? It's all kind of like pixies and gnomes and rainbows and princesses and real just sort of cute fantasy stuff. It's a complete departure from the rest of the island. Zooming in, you can see. I often start off making one of these word clouds of just jot down lots of little bubbles with keywords in as a starting point of just thinking, well, what would you have in a theme park? You start off. I usually think about characters first, so pixies and gnomes and goblins and piskies, which is like a Cornish version of a pixie. And then thinking, well, fast food and rides, obviously, and a petting zoo would be quite cute. You could play around with that. And also costumes, like what would the employees wear? And this will all be set in, because our game is set in the autumn, 1987. So it's out of season, all the tourists have gone home. So what would it be like? How is a closed theme park different from an open one? And then starting to think about some of the rides. We've got, this is the classic spinning teacups one. and you can see some different designs for the cups, slightly sort of anthropomorphized to look more like enemies. So you feel like you're, if this ride is out of control, you feel like you are dealing with, forces. It's not just a load of spinning teacups. And then also some costumes. These didn't make it in, but are kind of weird and funny, like Cornish pasty hats, well, helmets, maybe just heads, I guess, with the steam coming out of the pastry holes, which are also like the eye holes. Actually went more towards a sort of pixie kind of thing, this being a sort of like papier-mâché fiberglass head. And thinking about these being like left around the park, and like maybe the girls of the game, our two main characters could jump in and roll around inside, or put it on and run around and things like that. But then I took that a little bit further and started to think about, well, if there's an ancient curse on the island and it can like possess things and take them over, how would it affect all of the things in the theme park? What would it look like to have like the box that Chicken and Chips comes in, if that came to life and started like chasing you? Or what does a malevolent Cornish pasty look like? And also like thinking about what would be like natural hazards. So for instance, a theme park is going to need a lot of maintenance. There'll be a lot of tools around. So if those tools came to life, maybe you're being chased by a rake, which is kind of spiky, and then it's very, very simple drawing. But I think those were probably some shears for trimming hedges. They could be chasing you around. Various other things. There's the discarded costumes that I was talking about earlier, which is the one that we sort of went big on, really. This became an enemy that gets possessed by the curse, and then the head like sort of hops around and shoots like flaming eyeballs out of it, in a video gamey style. So yeah, all sorts of stuff. Some more piskies, think about how they would make the theme park sort of bring it to life, but bring it to life with like cardboard cutouts essentially. This would have been fun. Like one of those wobbly things, where they blow the air up through and it wobbles around. But horrible to animate, so didn't do that one. Concentrated on just making lots of these instead. And then some other like sections and things that might be fun in the theme park, like treetop walkways and a petting zoo, and dispensing machines, a wishing well, novelty cars to push kids around in, sand pits. And I think if you're a theme park owner and you want your theme park to be successful, you kind of need to think, well, it's for the whole family. So you need to make sure that there's stuff for the whole family to do. So I wanted to make sure I did something similar of breaking it down of, it's quite hard holding this, let's hold it at the top. It's a whole new style. Right, so, to make the theme park as successful as possible, we want to make sure that babies got something to do, kids got something to do, grumpy teenagers probably haven't got anything to do, but they'll find something to do, which they probably shouldn't. Mum and dad have got something to do, and grandparents have, so that helped with the design. Sort of like zooming back a little bit and thinking about, well, who's going to use this place and what would they want to get out of it, rather than just, thinking purely like, rides. Here's some princesses. They were, one of the themes of the theme park is to have these sort of like Disney princesses that are very, very cute, but kind of, not very exciting role models. So Nessa and Demelza are keen to customize and improve these fake princesses using their own abilities. So having some fun with that. It's probably most of that. see what else have we got. Oh, here's quite fun. So this is actually from a different different part of the game. So not theme park anymore. This is a scrap yard, scrap metal yard, the kind of place that full of all sorts of machinery, quite dangerous stuff. You know, somewhere that kids should definitely not go into, but is exactly the sort of place that kids do want to get into. So, you know, kind of an exciting place for them to go. And, you know, I like to get all of the potential assets down, not as a list, but just like drawing them and, you know, drawing like an ice cream van and then getting excited while I'm drawing that I'm going to move on and do an arcade cabinet. It just, you know, you spend more time on each element, it helps, you know, helps you think ahead of what you're going to come up with next. So that's a sort of typical starting point for a level. Some other things that are happening in the theme park. Thinking of whether we could get any references to Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister at the time. Things about VHS tapes and then also enemies as well. So we have these gauntlets, that sort of scuttling hands of undead knights that, you know, scuttle around and attack you. I was kind of hoping that they might be able to be like sort of little face huggers, a slight Aliens reference. Don't really like to go big with the pop culture references too much, but kind of fun if it like latched onto you. That was a little bit hard to pull off, but they attack you by poking you in the eye. As you kind of imagine, you know, if you're a hand, you know, you don't really have a lot of weapons, so your fingers are your weapons. So they poke you in the eye, and they're also a little bit cheeky, and when they get far enough away from you, they flip the V's at you. Very rude. And then thinking about where this theme park, where the scrapyard is going to be set. So with the whole island design, I wanted to make sure that it always felt quite natural to go to the levels. You know, we have like a sort of big open world, well, a small open world compared to like Rockstar or games that have thousands of people working on them. We've basically got 2 of us most of the time. But we have this small open world that you can explore, and then the various levels coming off it. I wanted to make sure that when you go to one of those levels, it feels natural that you're going into a new space. It doesn't feel like you just cycle around in some woods and then you get a loading screen and then you're in a scrapyard. You know, it needs to build up, feel quite believable. So when going to the scrapyard, you cycle through the woods, and I wanted to make sure that you had like an interesting area that was quite sort of open and unconstrained before you then go into the level, which is much more, you know, puzzle solving and opening doors and dealing with enemies in like enclosed spaces. So it felt that it would be good to have an area that you can really just be free to just like cycle around on your bikes and have some fun before you go in there. So this section's quite sort of scribbly, but this was it's like an estuary, the banks of an estuary. So it feels different from the harbour, which is the sea, you know, very stormy. This is much more tranquil, but it's still got water and it's still got boats. And it's actually based on an area I used to go and visit as a kid called Coombe, which is in Cornwall, just near Truro. Very beautiful place to go and visit. And that is a little estuary, quite hidden, but it is a very, very deep river. It's quite sort of overgrown. It's got trees all around it. There's also somewhere that big shipping companies would like park up enormous boats, enormous like rusting boats for like a year or two. I don't really know why they parked them up there. I mean, I guess they just needed to store them somewhere. But it was always quite exciting. It felt kind of like quite Indiana Jones, that you were going along by the shore and you go around the corner and you go through some trees, and then suddenly there's this enormous like boat just there, you know, giant metal rusting ship. So I think, you know, that was some of the influence on the scrapyard as well. You know, this sort of mixture of rusty metal meets like beautiful countryside. Anyway, so because it's an estuary, it's tidal still, so the shoreline is going to be rising and falling. And I definitely remember as a kid, you would just be like picking around in the mud, and sometimes like, I don't know, all kinds of things to find, and lots of little boats that, as the tide goes out, they're kind of like sitting at strange angles and waiting for the tide to come back in again. But basically, exactly with a really nice flat plane to cycle around on, see your bike tracks creating cool patterns in the sand. So that's the kind of outside the scrapyard area. And then starting to think, well, how would it all fit together on the map, and also like what are some of the main themes. And Moo is really keen to have a level that used magnets. Obviously, scrap metal plus magnets equals gameplay. So that was a good starting point. I started sketching out some motifs and ideas using like cranes with magnets on that you would have in a scrap metal yard, and that felt like you could get quite a lot out of that, and also by combining it, say, with a car crusher. So maybe there's some puzzling that we could get out of. You've got one type of item here, a car, and it goes in, it gets crushed, and it comes out as a very different item, much smaller, much more compact. Is there some like puzzling gameplay you could come up with there? So we're more now in the sketchbook into like designing and thinking about, basically this is like the step before then prototyping some stuff in Unity and actually seeing what works. Some of which I would do, and a whole chunk that Moo would do as well. So some fun stuff. And then what else have we got? I think this might sign off after this page, but it's quite a vibrant one to have a look at. Not all of this, well, a whole bunch of this never made it into the game, but it's very quick and easy and cheap to put down all your ideas in a sketchbook, and you can pick the ones you like the most. So these were all like potential characters that might have turned up in the scrapyard. Scrap metal dealer who owns it. Maybe some guard dogs. I got very into this, the idea of having a gang of teenagers who maybe just watched Mad Max. It's that sort of era, the original Mad Max, and they've gone a bit sort of feral, and they've set up their own little Lord of the Flies style society, and they're all like wearing calendars and bits of metal and strapping old computer keyboards around their chests for no reason. I thought they would be quite fun to hang out with. Various other people down there as well. So like I say, a whole bunch of it never makes it in, but it's good to get it down. And similarly, I find it really useful to like write down problems as well. I think that's one of the huge advantages of this sort of journaling style sketchbooks, is that you might have a problem that you know that something isn't quite right, and you hope that you'll be able to solve it. But if you write it all down in a sketchbook and sort of like really lay out what the problems are that you're trying to solve, even if you don't have time to fix it right then, there might be a time slightly later in the project when you've passed that milestone, or some other area that you thought was going to be really problematic. It was actually quite easy. It's really good to like flick back through your sketchbook and go, oh, okay, yeah, okay, you could maybe tackle that now. So that's about it, really. Hope you've enjoyed that little look into my big pile of scribbles. Obviously, like, we're incredibly grateful to all our Kickstarter backers who have really made this project possible. One of the rewards for some of the higher tier backers is to get an art book which is a collection of scans of all of these sketchbooks. So now the game is done, and we'll be busy on the scanner for a while. So I'm looking forward to putting that together and be able to, well, dive through all of these pages without me talking over it. And yeah, I mean, the game comes out in a few hours. It's quite nerve-wracking. But me and Moo and Kenny on the audio and Daniel Pemberton, our composer, have all been working hard, and nothing's ever perfect, but I think we've made something with a lot of character, and hopefully a lot of charm. Not your, I don't know, it just stands on its own 2 feet, on its own 2 wheels. Yeah, so if you play the game, I hope you enjoy it, and yeah, thanks for watching.